Okay, why did it not start? Okay. Welcome to another episode of Israel at War. I'm Phyllis Zimbler-Miller, and with me today is a frequent contributor and very much respected educator, Dr. Michael Berenbaum. He's the director of the Sigi Ziering Institute at the American Jewish University, where he also teaches Jewish studies. Today, Michael informs me we only have 5 topics to discuss. I'm teasing him a little. So, Michael, start from the top.
Well, number one, as we speak right now, we are in the 130th day of the war, and it doesn't look like it's going to end anytime soon. So that means that we've gone from an emergency, but continues to be an emergency, but has also become a certain sense of routinization and the like. There are several things we should consider. Number one, there was a fortunate event the other day, which is that Israel rescued 2 hostages, which brings the number down. The claim by Hamas is that in the process they killed 3 hostages, but we will never know whether that is the case. And we also have discussions continuing at a very high level in Cairo in what are called proximity talks, meaning that the Israelis talk to one side and then the Hamas talks in another room, and the communication goes in between. And the seriousness of that is clear because of the fact that you have the head of the Mossad there as part of the discussions. There has always been a tension between the military objectives in rescuing the hostages. There's also a dialectic between the military situation and the rescue of hostages, because the only reason that Hamas would be wanting a ceasefire is if Israel is posing an increasing threat to its rule. And consequently, the closer that discussions come to a ceasefire, the more you understand that Israel seems to be within achieving something that we would like to imagine is a military goal. There is a tremendous domestic pressure on the Netanyahu government to deal with the hostages, and that creates a division within the government itself, in which segments of his government do not want to deal with the hostage question, namely the religious but not the ultra-Orthodox. Ultra-Orthodoxy has a tremendous tradition, unfortunately tested by Jewish history, over millennia of Pidyon Shvuyim, the redeeming of the captives, and consequently they are less resistant than the Smotrich and Ben Gvir wing of the Netanyahu coalition. Netanyahu is not the deciding factor on this. The war cabinet and the cabinet are deciding factors, and we're going to see tensions within them. And in fact, the only thing on the horizon that looks like it could break up the Netanyahu government is essentially some movement on the captives, which demands either a prolonged ceasefire or a cessation of hostilities, or the opposite, which is that a tremendous number of Palestinian prisoners have to be released for Israelis held captives, and they may divide that also between civilian Israelis and Israelis who are in the IDF, and consequently who are regarded in one sense as enemy combatants. We shall see how all of this develops, and we have to understand the tremendous tensions involved in that. We also should mention that Israel is on the brink and threatening to invade Rafah, And that creates essentially Rafah is the one area in the southern Gaza Strip which Israel has not entered, except again for the release of the hostages. And the problem with Rafah is the place to which the significant Palestinian Gaza population of Palestinians have sought refuge in. And consequently, if there are indeed 1.2 million people in Rafah, the question is, where do they go as Israel invades? And that creates tensions, both real tensions on the ground, humanitarian crises of a significant, enormous proportion, one could say, and also tension with the Biden administration, which is seeking clarity on Israel's part, clarity as to what does the day after look like after the war is concluded, and also clarity, what are the plans for the civilian population in Rafah if indeed Israel is planning to invade.
Michael, can I just say something? And also, let's talk about how Egypt does not want any of those refugees in Rafah to enter its territory and upset the agreement between Egypt and Israel, which is another really important factor.
Let's look at that by saying that Rafah is on the border with Egypt. It is also the place through which supplies have been coming into Gaza. Humanitarian supplies have been coming into Gaza. And there was some discussion, which has now been changed dramatically, that Egypt was so angry at Israel that, in essence, it was considering rethinking the Sinai Accords and the diplomatic and now strategic relationship between Israel and Egypt. That discussion has gone off the map and is no longer there. Egypt has made very clear that it wants to. Excuse me for 1 second. We'll have to edit this out. Tova, I'm on a Zoom. I'll have to call you back. Bye-bye.
Egypt has made Egypt
it clear that it does not want to lose the Sinai Accords. Equally clear is there's a division within Egypt between what it says publicly and what it says privately. What it says publicly is one thing. What it says privately is it's clear it does not want Hamas in power. And Hamas is allied with the enemy of President Sisi's political alliance. It's allied with the Muslim Brotherhood. And they are not unhappy with what Israel is doing to Hamas, even though they cannot say it publicly and will not say it publicly. But they are also interested in making sure, for domestic purposes as well, that humanitarian aid comes in and that there's not an enormous crisis of starvation and all of that. We should also add that you have now had the discovery of tunnels under UNRWA facilities, United Nations Relief and Refugee Works, which means that the United Nations is standing with a certain measure, additional measure of being discredited, because that could not happen without the knowledge of the United Nations officials, whether allied with Hamas or supposedly neutral. And you also have additional tunnels being discovered on the Shefa Hospital. And the tunnel network in Gaza has been enormously vast, which only increases the work of the IDF, of the Israel Defense Forces, in trying to get control of the area and not face an insurgency. There is serious discussion of tensions between the Biden administration and Israel, and it's leaked that President Biden has called Benjamin Netanyahu with a foul word that I'm not sure we can or cannot use in
Yeah,
in a thing, but it's an A, S, and then we'll leave a couple letters blank, OLE, and we'll leave to the reader's imagination. If that's so, that may be the most polite terms that have been used with regard to the Prime Minister of Israel in recent days, not only by those in the American administration, but certainly by Israelis who have lack of confidence in the leadership of Netanyahu. And we should say that you have a part of his government that has done things that are, what shall we say, out of touch with reality. They held a rally and a conference about the recolonization of Gaza. Israel left Gaza in 2005. Hamas came to power in 2007, and you now have a segment of the Israeli population which has support within the government that wants to recolonize Gaza. And again, were they actually to succeed, you would see a drop-off of virtually all international support for Israel, and certainly support within the United States would dramatically decrease. It's certainly, I've been on college campuses lecturing, and when people accuse Israel of colonization, you have a difficulty in refuting that when you have a celebration of colonization and an advocacy of population transfer, or what one might call ethnic cleansing. And they certainly do not make the case of Israel's public relations case any easier involved in that. So that's where we stand at day 130. The question of the horizon and what is to be achieved is there. The question of the pressure on Rafah is essential. Rafah is also clearly the place in Israel today, according to the Israeli papers, now has shown a picture of where Sinwar is in the tunnels with his family, and that is probably designed to indicate to Hamas leadership and to Sinwar personally that they know where he is and his time is limited, which puts additional pressure. So let's go in the following way. Only Israeli military pressure is going to lead to Hamas essentially agreeing to the return of hostages and either a cessation of a temporary truce or a cessation of action. Certainly, Israel, there are elements in Israeli society and the Israeli government that do not want to cease fire. If Israel advances on Rafah, it is an enormous civilian problem. It becomes an easier civilian problem for refugees and the like in about 4 or 5 weeks, because the weather will change and the winter will end. And consequently, one can set up tent cities, which are not pleasant or easy, but at least they're not dealing with that in the heart of winter. And there will be a humanitarian crisis. And the Biden administration has made clear that it expects Israel to plan for and deal with and grapple with that humanitarian crisis. The North is, again, problematic, but it's fairly clear to that there are limitations on both sides. Israel does not want another battle in the north.
We're talking about Hezbollah, just to make it clear.
In Lebanon, and Hezbollah wants to keep the Israeli units on edge, but has decided not to engage in full-fledged assault that would mean that Israel faces a two-front war, and they're sort of letting Hamas fight it out on their own with marginal support. That's where we are at day 130, but ask me some questions, Phyllis.
Yes.
With that,
Yes, I have an important question to ask, but I just want to say, having heard military reports, to remind people that there are still 4 battalions in Rafah of Hamas fighters. And without giving my opinion, since I do not have a background, I think allowing 4 battalions to exist from an enemy that has sworn to kill every Israeli, every Jew they can get their hands on is a really difficult position to say, yes, we'll let these 4 battalions stay in Gaza. But moving on to a question, in this week, I think yesterday, President Herzog had an opinion piece in the Wall Street Journal, and he said a phrase that I thought was very important. He said that there hasn't been enough discussion of the global impact of the catastrophic event of October 7th. And I think that's true. I think that we talk all the time. I don't mean you, I mean you as general, about Israel and Gaza, but we need to remind our listeners of what the global impact means
well,
of allowing this. Go ahead.
let's talk about the global impact. Look, it seems to be that there is a tacit and a direct alliance between Iran and Russia, in which Iran is supplying weapons to Russia. There is a standoff in the United States Congress on aid to Ukraine. There is an anti-West and anti-American alliance between China, Iran, and Russia. And all of this is reflected in the current situation. And in one sense, Iran is using surrogates, and Israel is representing itself as protecting the interests of the West in this alliance in a pro-American thing. Its case is weakened occasionally, and certainly President Herzog is not one of the people who weaken that. Its case is weakened when certain elements of the Israeli government, again, Mr. Smotrich and Messieurs Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, see it as an attack on the current administration, hoping for a Trump administration, and saying essentially that we can snub America and do without American support, which almost all Israelis regard as out of touch with reality.
Exactly.
So there is a global implication. There's also a tremendous global implication to what is now before Congress. The Senate has now passed aid for Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. Originally, they suspended that consideration for a border bill. The border bill came. The border bill was defeated in the Senate. The border bill was considered dead on arrival in the House. And Speaker Johnson now has a decision to make as to how deeply to fight the Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan aid, because the danger is that there can be a discharge bill on the House, which would be a defeat for him, that would require virtually unanimous Democratic support. Not every Democrat will be along, because part of the squad will vote against Israel, against Israeli aid, and therefore he must pick the Hakeem Jeffries must pick up Republican support in significant numbers to do the majority. There is an election to achieve the majority of 218 votes. There's an election today, which may or may not diminish the gap of the Republican majority, depending on who's elected. Ironically, the Republican candidate is an Ethiopian Jewess who has served in the IDF. So she is likely to come in and vote for Israeli aid were she to win, but it's not clear. It's going to be a very close election. We shall know within 6-7 hours what the outcome of that election is, and once it's certified, that person will come to Congress. Speaker Johnson has a problem. If he loses this, then he may also lose his speakership. If he wins it, then he owns the fate of what happens in Ukraine. And also, more equally importantly, Donald Trump has now threatened the NATO alliance and said in one of the most outrageous statements, not only made by a former president, but made by any political figure, essentially let Russia go have at them. And I've been in touch with people in Romania and people in Poland who are now deeply troubled by that remark and deeply concerned about the possibility of a second Trump presidency. The more interesting phenomenon politically on that is the degree to which he has not faced a significant pushback from Republicans, even people we would expect to be strong allies of NATO and the alliance. I'm thinking of people like Lindsey Graham, but Mitch McConnell did strongly support the aid to Ukraine, and Mitch McConnell's the minority leader in the Senate, the aid to Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan, and pushed it through and has come to a direct confrontation with Speaker Johnson. So all of this is caught in the mess of American political politics, including the sense that people are less interested in the outcome than in whether one side or another achieves a political victory. And that's a demise of patriotism and a demise of a sense of responsibility for the American future. So these, in one sense, if Israel faces division in its government, the United States faces deep division in its government and in its governing apparatus, and we are not in a very pleasant place to be.
I just want to say, and this is your specialty, but my husband and I, as Michael knows, were stationed with the U.S. Army in Munich from September 1970 to May 72. Why were we there? We were there to prevent the Russians from coming into Western Europe. And I, to this day, believe that Americans do not understand how much what happens in Europe can impact us in the United States and how we have to be concerned now rather than later. As Michael knows from his eminent position in Holocaust scholarship.
Oh, look, there is no question. Let's talk for a moment about Ukraine, which is, and again, some of what we hear in the political discourse is ridiculous. Most of the money that is being given to Ukraine takes the form of the purchase of American weapons and ammunition to transfer to Ukraine, and does not involve giving money to the government, most, not all, government of Ukraine. And consequently, the question of accountability and the question of corruption in Ukraine doesn't apply to those types of funds. Secondly, we've had a deep degrading of the Russian fighting forces being tied up in the Ukraine. And if that's the case, it's been done on the cheap in terms of American national interests. And but Europe is deeply concerned about Russian advances and who is the next target. And one thing we know from military history about Russia is Russia may not be an acute fighting force of great capability, but it is fully capable of enduring losses and defeat and strategic setbacks and continuing to press their case forward. Mr. Putin is obviously gambling on the fact that the West will lose interest and support, and probably gambling on the fact that Donald Trump will be the next president of the United States, and then he can do as he wants. And one of the interesting side bits of the question of support for Ukraine is that some of that support would not come all in the duration of the Biden term, which lasts until January 20th, 25. And some are concerned, have expressed an overt concern that if Trump did not pass on the additional aid, he could then be taken for a third impeachment were he to be president. And consequently, they want it all to end by January 20th, 2025. Again, the outcome of this election will determine, in fact, the nature of American support for Ukraine and the nature of American support for Europe in general. So when you talk about all of this having global implications, you have to juggle
Yes.
all of these elements at the same time. And it's a significant geopolitical mess.
Yes, that it is. So do you have any last words for this special report that you'd like to add?
I don't think any of us could imagine that the war would have endured for 130 days. Interestingly enough, pay attention to weather. Because both in the Ukraine and in Israel, Gaza, Israel, Lebanon, the weather will have a significant impact on it. And again, if I were an Israeli commander wanting to go into Rafah against the 4 battalions of Hamas fighters, and understanding that I could not have a great humanitarian crisis, I would try to delay such an invasion for at least a month, possibly 6 weeks, in order to have better conditions for outdoor living for 1,200,000 people, which would be difficult, painful, and degrading and dehumanizing and everything else, but not impossible. So that one has to be cautious about that. And you know that that in the winter, everybody in the Ukraine stays put, and it's only in the spring that you have a spring offensive. And let's look at what those conditions will be as well.
Thank you, Michael. We will check back with you soon. And as we end these particular sessions, we say, please bring them all home.